What we want to do is convince them that it's really not worth it to start using or even threatening to use force against Canada, that the cost would just not make it a good policy.
Here we go, another week fired up on Closer Look across the Village Media Network on this 19th day of January, Monday, with Michael Friscoletti. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Big news, I'll tell you, every day it's a bit of a head shaker where President Donald Trump and his latest musings are concerned.
And it's concerning because every day it ramps up. The Greenland situation is now on everyone's radar. Yeah. What's happening there? Trump saying that Greenland's going to be theirs, whether they take it by force or not. It's theirs. Yeah. Raises a whole bunch of questions around, a sovereign nation like Greenland just being taken over. You see other NATO countries are responding. They're sending troops there. They're putting out statements that this is not acceptable. Yeah. I believe by the time we're recording this, I believe the Carney government is either looking into or close to making a decision or have made a decision to send some Canadian troops there as well as part of that showing. But it raises the bigger question that has been written about lots lately and talked about is, what does this mean for Canada? The old rules, international law that would say you wouldn't just go take over a sovereign nation have kind of been kicked out the window. And especially if this happens in Greenland, people wonder, well, what's next for Canada? Maybe all this talk about 51st state is not really much of a joke. It's actually pretty serious. I'm not an expert on this. You're not an expert on this. But we do think it's important to bring someone in who does have a lot of expertise on this to talk about this and just put it into context. And I know that people listening or reading about this today are going to have all kinds of different opinions, and they're going to have all kinds of thoughts on this. But Adam Gordon is a former legal advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Right. So worked in the halls of power, advising the minister on major decisions, both involving Ukraine, the war in Gaza, and our relationship with the United States. He's now an independent researcher who's doing some work with the Cascade Institute, and he co-authored a column in the Globe and Mail last week about why we need to be ready for a possible U.S. Whether it be, I don't want to use the word invasion, a U.S. coercion into Canada. And it was a valid argument. And it got a lot of attention, obviously, but he's not the only person saying this. And so we invited Adam to come on the show just to talk about kind of where we stand and what we need to be thinking about and what the government would be thinking about. It's a great time to have this conversation.
When Donald Trump started musing about Canada becoming the 51st U.S. state, it was easy at first to think it was all bluster, but what's happening in Greenland right now has a lot of people worried about what Trump might have in store for us. In fact, a recent poll found that nearly 1/3 of Canadians believe the United States might attempt direct action against our country. Joining us to talk about where things stand and what our country should be doing to prepare is Adam Gordon, a former advisor to Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs and now an affiliated researcher at the Cascade Institute. Adam, thank you for your time tonight. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
All right, Adam, before we dive in, can you tell our viewers and listeners maybe a bit about yourself and what your role was in the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs?
Sure. I was the minister's senior legal and policy advisor. I led on a number of files, one being international law. On top of that, I led on all things to do with the Ukraine and Russia war, so relations with those countries with that issue, as well as was helped on the Middle East issue, specifically the war in Gaza.
A busy man.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, Adam, you recently co-authored a column in the Globe and Mail under the headline, "We need to prepare for the possibility that the U.S. uses military coercion against Canada." Let's start with the obvious question here, Adam. Why do we need to prepare for this possibility, which once seemed unthinkable?
Yeah, it did seem unthinkable. There's three things we've seen that led us to want to write this piece. The first is a pattern of behavior from the United States and from the President of the United States, where he's essentially treating sovereignty as optional. This is a man who has openly discussed the idea of wanting to acquire Canada, and we're seeing actions regarding other areas that he's commented on, either wanting to have U.S. ownership of, or other comments he's made that they're following through on. The second is, a few weeks ago, the United States released a new national security strategy. In that strategy, they promised the revival of the Monroe Doctrine, and the Monroe Doctrine is an old U.S. policy which has two sides. First is essentially telling the European powers at the time, but any other powers, hands off the Western Hemisphere. This is our zone. Stay away. Don't come here. Don't interfere. But the flip side of that coin is that it was essentially saying, hey, Western Hemisphere, you're our backyard. And we kind of get to do what we want here. Now, during the Cold War, which was the last time we kind of saw this really play out, this style of U.S. action, Canada seemed to be exempted from the things that were going on, whether you think of Panama, Nicaragua, Latin America. We got a special exemption from that. We tended to sort of be treated a little differently. This U.S. administration does not seem to have any special feelings for Canada. And so the statement that they are reviving this doctrine means that essentially we can't count on being exempted. And then the third piece is international law. And international law, we'd like to think, when it comes to someone like Maduro, look, terrible human rights record, all kinds of reasons why this is an individual who, it's quite frankly, Venezuela can do without. From an international law perspective, that's not actually relevant. That's not relevant to whether the United States unilaterally had the right to go in and impose their will on Venezuela. The same laws that should have and were supposed to protect Venezuela are the ones that would protect Canada. And so there's no difference. So when you add that all up, it at least becomes plausible that something could happen vis-a-vis Canada. And if that's the case, then we need to be ready.
It's a great point. And we talk about international law. It just, maybe, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, like you are, but it feels like that's all been thrown out the window. Like international law has kind of been, that's gone.
Doesn't mean
Does it feel that way to you?
Yeah, frankly, this is a very open question at the moment. This is something we're all grappling with in the international law world. International law has more power than just when people follow it or not. International law sets the boundaries for what is considered acceptable on the international stage. You go back to the 1800s, European powers didn't even, frankly, in the way that we do now, it wasn't considered unacceptable to invade your neighbors. Now it is. And we see that the response is part of what the power of international law is. You look at what's happened to Russia. Russia thought they could invade their neighbor, thought that they could just make that happen. We've all responded. And they've paid a massive reputational price for that. And so these are the kinds of things that international law still has some power to do. Whether it's the international reputation, a government's reputation with its own people, there is still some power, but very much we're in a real nerve-wracking time, and it's unclear where international law is going to go.
Adam, in terms of preparation and us actually preparing for the potential of this, what do we have to do?
Right. So I think the question that I've seen from some people over the past couple of weeks is, well, or I guess the assertion I should say is, if the U.S. invades, then Canada can't do anything anyways. I don't think that's true. Now, look, if a superpower decides to invade a country, that's a dicey situation, to be sure. However, you look at the history of superpowers invading other countries in recent years, or in the past 100 years, whether that's Russia in Ukraine, whether that's the United States not invading, but using military action in Vietnam. Doesn't always go as they plan. U.S. in Afghanistan. And the key is to make it costly. And there's two elements to making it costly. The first is the actual more tangible side of that, which looks like building up our military capacity, building up our military resources. That includes everything from hard material to expanding, amplifying the scope of our forces. I'm not a military planner, so I won't presume to know the specifics of what our government should do. And to be clear, we're already engaging in this. The Carney administration is working hard to expand our military capacity, but this is more of a one more element of impetus to really have urgency on that. And then the second side of cost is reputational cost. Again, whether that's with the international community, if the U.S. government faces significant backlash, that's really the key. And we want that to be international, but we want that to also be at home from Americans. And the two are linked, of course. If the international community is unhappy and considers something to be an unacceptable action, that doesn't play well with Americans. Now, the government can always, use justifications, all kinds of things, try and convince people of anything. But by and large, that's a side of the cost. So if they do something, it'll be really difficult. What we want to do is convince them that it's really not worth it to start using or even threatening to use force against Canada, that the cost would just not make it a good policy.
So you've been behind the scenes of power. You've advised the Minister of Foreign Affairs. What's going on back there, Adam? I mean, people must be feeling pretty nervous these days. Yeah,
people are feeling nervous. Look, I think we said it in our piece, in our op-ed. We're in a truly nonlinear world. All the rules, all the predictability that we used to be able to count on, it's much harder to know what's going to happen, and that makes it harder to plan for things. It makes it harder to know what to do. Everything's multifaceted. Whenever we make a decision, we can no longer count on our overall geostrategic understanding and go, okay, we're just going to deal with this incident, with this isolated issue, and have it not spill over. I'll give an example, which is when there was pressure from the United States for Canada to join the war in Iraq, we got to make that decision, yes, knowing that it was going to have some impact on Canada's relationship. Everything you do with another country is going to have some impact. But we didn't start to question whether this was going to lead to the downfall of our economy or cause this country to consider us not a friend. And that was an issue that directly involved the U.S. Now we're seeing issues that don't even directly involve the U.S., and we need to be much more aware that if our positions are out of line with theirs, that's going to possibly lead to complications. The good news is there is a growing recognition, both in the Canadian government. I mean, I think Canadians have always been well aware. I think we have we've got our finger on the pulse of the United States. We live right next to them. We consume their media. We're so connected that we really, really do understand the Americans, I think, in a way that is that comes from that incredible closeness and level of ties. I think elsewhere, including in Europe, there's a growing recognition of the need to recognize that we're in a new world, that everything needs to change and figure out ways to confront that reality. But as you say, I mean, the long and short of it is, it's a really difficult time behind the scenes. We're trying to break new ground and come up with solutions to problems we've never had. We haven't had in 100 years.
You're right, and you said it best. The stakes just feel so high. The stakes are always high. If you're the federal government, if you're the PMO or you're the Minister of Foreign Affairs, stakes are always high. There's always big decisions to make, but it feels like they're as high as they've ever been, at least in my lifetime. Yeah, I think so. Look, I had a friend who works in business, in commodity trading, who said, a number of months back, jokingly said, "Well, Adam, crystal ball, tell me, are we going to have tariffs? What's going to happen?" And I kind of half jokingly said back, if tariffs are the worst thing that we're talking about, then all told, that's not that bad. And yet tariffs, we know, could be
debilitating for the Canadian economy. So there's all sorts of levels of this, economic, our ability to live our lives as Canadians, to travel, to enjoy all the prosperity that we have, geopolitical. We need to think about our relationships, not just us and the Americans, but as well, if we're going to have a new relationship with them, what that means for all of our other relationships, whether with traditional partners. One of the big things that I've been advocating, and we have this in the op-ed, is that we need to really be looking at non-traditional partners, especially those facing similar issues to us, whether that's those that live next to a superpower and are dealing with that. Essentially, find friends everywhere on Earth, because we're going to need to be much more diversified in how we approach all of world affairs.
Adam, let's talk about the Greenland situation for a second. What are you watching for specifically?
I'm watching, again, my strongest interest is in seeing how Europeans respond, as well as how Canada responds. I think that what comes next, not just in Greenland, but in other issues, will really be dictated by the response here. I think that people perhaps underplay how much these situations have to do with each other. I think, for instance, when Putin looked to invade Ukraine, he was looking at what he saw as a pattern of non-follow through from the West. And I think he was actually quite surprised to find how much we really came in, showed unity, showed resolve in confronting him, because I think that maybe from his perspective had not been demonstrated, in whether it was in Afghanistan, in other scenarios, to where he thought that, I'll push, they'll say some words, but then really they'll just kind of let it go at the end of the day. So similarly, I think what's really needed here is a unity of purpose, is an understanding of the stakes, and that this is really, like, this is it. This is the moment that we need to show how we're gonna respond. The other side I'm looking for, and we're already seeing some signs of this, is how the United States responds, not the executive, not Donald Trump's administration, but everyone from the American public to the Senate and Congress, especially Republicans. I think, seeing how Donald Trump's own party reacts and responds to this, because this is very different. I think, like I said earlier, from an international law perspective, Venezuela is not identical to Canada, but very similarly situated. It's not really relevant what kind of government. But in the minds and hearts of people, it's obviously very different. Venezuela was a regime that had done, terrible human rights abuses, oppression, all kinds of things. And so I think the idea that the United States went in and confronted this government, no one's going to shed a tear for the Maduro regime. Conversely, you have Denmark, and you have NATO ally and friend, and so I think the more that we see reactions from the Americans of, well, no, we can't do this, we shouldn't do this, we wouldn't do this. Hopefully, that's enough that we'll see a change in behavior.
For sure. It's a very difficult choice for the Canadian government. As we record this, there's reports about the fact that Canada may send some troops there, because we know some NATO allies are also sending troops over there. At the same time, Mark Carney's been appointed to this new group that's going to help with peace in Gaza, which is Donald Trump's creation. I just can't imagine being in the PMO right now, or being in your old shoes trying to advise on what's the right move. What's the right move here, Adam?
Right. It gets even more complicated. Our force capacity is there are limits to what we can do. That includes needing to continue demonstrating our support in Eastern Europe, Canadian contingent in Latvia, I believe. That includes our own Arctic. We've heard, I've heard an NBC segment that behind closed doors, while Greenland's getting all the attention, Donald Trump is expressing a lot of displeasure with Canada's own management of our Arctic, again, I can't confirm whether that's true or not. NBC reporting that those close to the president are saying this. So if we're sending people to Greenland, that capacity has to come from somewhere, whether it's our own Arctic, our own national bases, or deployment. So real difficult. The other thing, similarly, Mark, Prime Minister Carney was in China recently. Again, that's a relationship where you go back 10 years, and Canada's relationship with China was kind of our own issue. It was between us and China. Now, how we interact with China and the closeness of that relationship is something that the Americans are watching, are going to notice. Now, luckily, Trump so far has come out saying, good for Canada. They should absolutely go do that. But everything becomes unclear. As far as responding to Greenland, on the force side, I really can't comment. I don't have that expertise or that understanding of our forces. But I'd love to see us continue to stand up for the norms and the notion that this should not be on the table, that the people of Greenland, the people of Denmark, complex relationship internally between the two. But regardless, this is a decision that is within the right of that nation or those nations to decide, and an issue for them to figure out when it comes to their sovereignty.
Absolutely. If it's hard to even put into words, but this is NATO countries versus NATO countries is kind of what's happening in Greenland right now. Where do you see NATO in a year from now? Is it just a total guess?
I think so. Truly hard to predict. Honestly, I wish I knew. Even as you say, there's obviously the U.S. on the one side, other NATO countries on the other. But even where the NATO countries that are not the U.S. go with each other is something that's very much. We'll see how that plays out.
Just a couple more questions. Thank you again, Adam. Is this worry that we all feel this worry? We're talking about it with family and friends. This concern that this could actually possibly happen, some kind of military force coming to Canada from the United States. But could there be some smaller steps first? Would they maybe break up NORAD, or would they more economic sanctions or tariffs, things like that? Could there be a progression here?
Absolutely. I would argue that progression has already started.
Yes, for sure.
I would say that I'm helping to start it, quite frankly, which is that the comments themselves are bringing us into a pattern of behavior that responds to even the risk of the threat of force. That can escalate to being an actual threat of force. Even if it's an offhand comment, if Trump says, well, the Canadians are, we don't like what they're doing up there, so maybe we should move some troops further north, up to our northern border. That alone is enough to start to impact Canada's sovereignty and our ability to make decisions on our own terms. But there's everything. Then, one step up from there is actually sending troops to the northern border. There's a lot that can be done to bring a country in line that is short of actually marching troops across a border.
Adam, let's talk about average citizens for a sec, like those of us in this room. And how do we begin to prepare? What should we be doing?
Oh, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, look, I've worked for politicians, and I'm not going to sit here and claim that they should always get. I'll say that the criticizing our politicians is a long tradition, and I think that they deserve more slack and credit and make difficult decisions at all times, but especially right now, I think we really need to show a unity as a country. These are, as we have been discussing, incredibly difficult times. I think there's going to be a lot that happens for reasons that people don't necessarily see on the surface, either because we're playing to considerations that are trying to play the chess game, as well as looking forward a few moves, some of the things we do there. The other thing, as far as preparing, I think the elbows up movement is great. Let's keep on demonstrating our unhappiness with the situation. Avoiding trips to the United States where we can. Buying Canadian is fantastic. And then, yeah, really, that's about it. It's hard. These are things that can't really. They need to happen at an organizational level more than one individual to the next. But I think showing those signs that we're unified and that we're all on board with the plan.
Yeah. Sorry to keep asking you questions, Adam, but I could keep going all day. This is a fascinating and it's an important conversation, right? But I do wonder, have you, in all your discussions, is there a bit of a pro-American sentiment out there in some pockets of Canada? There's some people in Canada that are saying, you know what, maybe being the 51st state would be a good idea.
I don't have any particular insight on this. I haven't conversed with anyone who said that. I'm seeing, we're all seeing this play out possibly in I think the spotlight is on Alberta, given the talk of referendum, and we're seeing some polling that shows this. What we are also seeing, as we actually, someone mentioned in our scenario there in the piece, there is some indication of meetings between those leading the separatist movement and elements in the United States, including in the U.S. government. So there's definitely an interest there from those individuals, but yeah, beyond that, I'm not sure.
Here's the most unfair question I'm going to ask you. Would we have any hope if America came across the border? What do you think? How do you think Canadians would respond to that?
Like I said, it's on the one hand, superpowers can bring an immense amount of force. On the other hand, I'll again point back to the history in the past 100 years of how well that's gone. I think it goes especially poorly when a country doesn't believe in the actions they're taking. For all the difficulties, all of the challenges, all of the casualties that the United States suffered in Afghanistan, there was at least some recognition that there was, that they had a reason to be there, I think, among the American population. Much less so in Iraq. There would be much less so in Canada. Now, the Trump administration has been incredible at convincing at least elements of their base, having a particular narrative, and then months later, that's the narrative that a certain segment of the U.S. population is really believes in. But American population at large, I think and I hope, would be quite appalled at the notion of a use of force against Canada. And so especially if it started to cost them, if there were casualties and body bags coming home to the United States, I think that could get pretty unpopular pretty quick when they really don't believe in it. So you have to hope that that's enough. You have to hope that the domestic pressure, international pressure, from my perspective, just because, how Article 5 of NATO, which is the one that says that countries are supposed to come to each other's defense, that I can't remember the exact wording, but essentially an attack on one is an attack on all. We've never had to confront the question of what happens when it's one member of NATO using force against another member of NATO. But I would hope and think that other NATO members would treat this as something that did engage that obligation, that did bring them into the question. Again, raise the costs, make it incredibly unpleasant to be in Canada.
This is my last question for you, Adam. It really hit home what you just said. The idea that there could be a conflict and body bags would be going back to the United States from a war or a conflict with Canada is just unthinkable, as we said at the top of the show. And we're all mourning something, too, because this friendship, this neighborly relationship we've had with America is real. We were very close. We have family and friends on both sides of the border. We've had so many decades of prosperity together and fighting alongside each other. And certain, we lost lots of soldiers in Afghanistan, friends who we lost there, for example, not to mention the world wars. And so we're all kind of mourning this change. This still feels so unbelievable. Is there any scenario where in 10 years things will get back to normal and we'll look back and say, or is this forever changed?
I think, I want to clarify something, because I don't want the sort of story out of this saying that former staffers said body bags will go back to the United States. Look, we're talking. This is hypothetical, worst case scenario, active conflict that by no means. In all ways, we want to avoid any military confrontation, even if there is the threat of use of force. De-escalate. Like I went to law school in the United States. I have unbelievable number of friends. Like all Canadians, massive number of connections. These are terrible scenarios that we're talking about. Like, we don't want to be talking about these. As far as things getting back to normal, I think that what we saw with the United States after the first Trump administration, when Biden came in, they tried to do a bit of a "we're back." And to a degree, it kind of worked, because the first Trump administration was actually quite different than this administration. And it worked somewhat. We weren't, there was some skepticism of like, well, are you're back in the Paris Agreement for now? And, all these things where they tried to come in and take up their leadership position that they had. And there was some skepticism. At this point, Canada's changed. Europe has changed. So even if the Americans were to snap back to where they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, develop that sort of renewed approach, renewed commitment to international law, I think that it'll take a long time before we're ready to go, we're actually willing to really trust you and put our economy in your hands in a certain way, put our defense. Like, I think that whether they've changed, we've changed.
Good point. Adam, last question before we let you go. Could you ever have imagined in your wildest dreams having a conversation like this one tonight where Canada-U.S. relations are concerned?
Yes and no. The no is that, look, we've had 70 years where we've lived in a world where rule of law has predominated. Yes, with exceptions, clearly, but overall the thrust has been in that direction. Where Canada and the U.S. gripe at each other in a big brother, little brother kind of way, but we share a hockey league and a basketball league and professional associations. And, I think what a transmission, I remember learning about 15 years ago that a single Ford transmission from parts, from raw material to completed transmission, crossed the bridge from Windsor into Detroit and back 40 times or something like that. Wow. Like, we're so integrated with them. So it seems unbelievable. But on the flip side, there's a great analogy, which is, if you jump out of an 11-story building and 10 stories down, go, well, this whole myth of the ground thing, like, this worked out pretty well so far. Things are unbelievable until they're not. And history has shown time and again that a certain action, a certain global context predominates for a long time, and we just get used to it. And it seems implausible that would ever change. But time and again, things have changed. Whether it's the Roman Empire falling or the Tsar Nicholas II falling, or then the Soviet Union falling. Like, things will suddenly be different and be completely changed forever. And we see this time and again. And I think that's the real lesson here is that just because it's felt impossible for the past era, there's a real feeling out there that we're in a new era.
That we are. Okay, let's leave it there. There's Adam Gordon, a researcher at the Cascade Institute and a former senior legal and policy advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Adam, great insight tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I'm not sure I even know where to begin to follow up after that conversation. To me, it just seems like we're living in a really bad movie.
It's like a Twilight Zone, but I think that's exactly how people feel. I think that's why it's important to have a conversation like this with someone like Adam that has been on the inside, understands the conversations that are happening, And as he said, to be clear, he's not saying that this is inevitable, that there's going to be, and there's a lot of experts who've come out on different ways. I mean, we didn't mention it, but I know, like, Bob Ray, the former UN ambassador, Canada's former ambassador, says it's very clear that Canada's on the menu for U.S. aggression, was his quote. Michael Ignatieff, the former Liberal leader, wrote in the Walrus the other day, Canada and Mexico will watch what happened in Venezuela and begin thinking the unthinkable. What if they have to defend themselves against Russia, not against Russia and China, but against their next door neighbor?
It's just wild.
Yeah, so people of prominence are saying this. They're worried. And let's be honest, the average Canadian is worried about this. That poll that mentioned, there's a third of Canadians, almost a third, that are worried about this. This is something, I think it's because things have just blown up so much, that things are so different than they're used to. But as Adam said at the end, that's what history is all about. Things change.
Yeah, and it just seems like every day there's something new, right? Something that, you keep hearing words like unhinged. And I mean, obviously actions speak louder than words. And when you act that way, that's how people are going to respond. I mean, I just read today now, given the 49,000 EVs that the Carney government negotiated with China, Trump saying, nope, we're not letting those vehicles in.
Like, so if they tried to go across the border?
No, he's saying that once that deal is done and Canada has those 49,000 vehicles, you cannot cross them into America.
That's crazy. How would they even enforce
How would they even know that?
Yeah,
but this is, he's ready, fire, aim,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. It's interesting what Adam said, too, about how, the great thing about our democracy is that we can criticize our politicians up and down.
Sure.
And he's saying, but in this particular time, you can still do that, but try to have a little bit of grace because these are tough decisions. And I don't disagree with them. I'm not defending any politician in particular, but I can't imagine. I have a hard enough time making decisions in the job I do. Could you imagine making decisions
I can't.
in that role?
No.
So imagine the prime minister right now is deciding, do I follow other NATO countries and send a few troops into Greenland, which would be more symbolic than anything else, but still, a difficult question, at the worry of upsetting Trump even more, because that's really the number one goal of any diplomacy right now, is not to upset Donald Trump. And at the same time, Trump's asking him to come on board into this Gaza peace plan that they're going to work. It's just, I think it's impossible to make those decisions. You talk about a chess match, it's like 10 chess matches at once. But I do appreciate Adam coming on to have that conversation, and hopefully we'll have him on again.
I'm happy that our biggest decision is who's our next guest.
Yeah, that's right, which we still haven't figured out.
But we will right after we close the books on this one. Closer Look at villagemedia.ca and, of course, closerlookpodcast.ca to get all back episodes. Derek Turner, producer of this evening's program, as always, for Michael Friscoletti, our editor-in-chief. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow night at 7 right here on Closer Look.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.